بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب زدني علما.
So the first thing is, in the lack of experience, the main problem is the real world and the theoretical knowledge. The real world and theoretical knowledge is totally different. Now again, I'm talking about only about the network related what we do. Okay, because let's say if you're doing a CCNA course, a simple CCNA course, many of you have already done CCNA course, maybe because most of the people might not be freshers. Many have already done CCNA. So the problem is you learn CCNA course in that there are plenty of things I teach. Okay, you learn routing, you learn switching, you learn access list, you learn NAT, and there are many things. You learn some services, logging, syslogs, and everything you learn in theoretical terms and some labs. You learn, right? Like simple example, you say you learn routing, where you implement some OSPF protocol to provide the communication between the routing protocols. Okay, that is something what you learn. So you configure the OSPF or you configure the switching, you configure some VLANs, those kind of things. But again, if you go to the real world, the problem is, do you really go and create the VLANs every day over there? No, you don't create the VLANs, because when you create the VLANs, you configure the routing protocol, you configure anything, that is only one time. And most likely it will be running for many years. And what you do there, you just need to monitor and troubleshoot. What you do generally, the monitoring and troubleshooting, right? So your job is to make sure that you keep monitoring, and if there is any issue, VLAN issue, you just fix it. If there is any port security issue, the user says connect computer, there is a port security issue. Like recently, there is a issue where when there is a user connected here is unable to connect to the network, there is some issue. Then you realize that this port is in error disabled state. Again, the question is why it is in a disabled state. Then you have to give the command called show. What is that? Show port security error disabled. You have to find out on which ports it is enabled with port security, and then then you have to say show error disabled. Then figure out that port is in a disabled state. There are many commands. You need to go step by step. This is a different thing. So the real world thing is different, because in real world, majority of the things you do is you do troubleshooting. Mainly in the real world, what you do, the troubleshooting and the problem solving, and every network is different. Okay, even if I teach you one network, let's say one company network with around 20 computers or 20 routers, big network, but still when you go to the production network, it will be a different. There will be different technologies used, different devices used. So the actual learning starts when you start working. Okay, so this is one challenge where this is a major gap everyone face. Even in the interviews also, when you go to the interviews, they will not ask you what is VLAN. Okay, so don't expect that. What is VLAN? They may ask you whether you know or not. That might be the only first question. But especially if you're going with an experience, they expect you to know your problem solving skills. Okay, if there is a user sitting here and he's trying to communicate with the server, and there's no communication happening between them, now what you have to do? This is what expected. So this is what expectations. I'll come to the expectations. This is what. So the main problem is what we do in the real world and what you learn in the theoretical knowledge is again different. Same like your graduation. Okay, you do graduation on one stream, let's say computer stream, and when you go in a computer as a computer engineer or some job, it's a totally different thing. You don't learn anything like that. But don't think it's like that same. Okay, it's totally different, but there will be a slight changes. So there are many things you have to know. The first thing is the configuration task. Like I said, there is a lot of difference between the configuration device and the live network. When you do the things in a live network, it's a different. When you do the same thing in the lab network, that's a different thing. The scenario will be different. The topology will be different. The requirement will be different. The actual devices will differ. There are plenty of things. Okay. Now, the other thing is monitoring monitoring, there is something called monitoring as well. I'll just come to that. Okay. So there is a huge difference between the class environment. Okay. So this is like a class environment and the real world environment. So the live network. Okay. So that's a different thing. So the second thing is complexity in multi-vendor networks. Now the second issue is multi-vendor network, because again, let's say if you're doing CCNA course, you just learn only Cisco commands. We just see how the Cisco switch will work, how to configure that, how to configure the Cisco routers. But once you go to the live network, you still have HP switches, you still have Arista switches, you may have some Huawei switches, Huawei. So there are plenty of different vendors in the switches, because again, if you're working for an IT solution company, then you have one client running using Cisco switches, another client using Huawei switches, and another is using HP. So there is a huge difference in the command line. So the core concept remains the same, but at the end, the command line configurations, these things will change. And that's where again you will face the problem. Of course, as I said, the continuous learning is important. Okay, that's something you. The third thing is the troubleshooting and the problem solving things. Troubleshooting and the problem solving is totally different, because in the class environment, even if I teach you the troubleshooting, generally the class environment troubleshooting exercises will be different, where we create our own problems and we know the issues because we set up the lab. But when you go to the live network, the network has been set almost 20 years before by someone else, designed by someone else. So, but you need to understand and troubleshoot. That is again takes some time. The real world troubleshooting requires a lot of things to identify, resolve many things. Sometimes, internet, some whatever the issues may not be clear. So you have to figure out. There are plenty of things you do. Of course, you learn as you work. I'm not saying it's not possible, but that is more a challenging where people will face. Okay, so other things like documentation, basically documentation and logs. So most of the companies rely on documentation, how the devices are connected and other things, right? So the documentation is important in any organization, because the documentations or typically provide an accurate information about your network, because the network documentation, it's a complete documentation and the logs will keep you track. Again, if you've done some CCNA stuff, you already know some documentation and adds other things. One more thing, again, in the live network, the security considerations is very important, because in the classroom, security is not important. In the classroom, if I say just go and apply the ACL to block this traffic, to permit this traffic, we simply go and do it, because it's not going to be a problem. Even if it doesn't work, that's okay. It's a lab environment where that's not a big deal. But in the real world, the security conditions are very important, because you also have a firewalls where you have to access the control. You have to make sure that there is no security breach. You cannot just go and say trial and error. You cannot do it. You have to be accurate. In the lab environment, we do trial and error. If works, not works, then it's fine. But in the production network, you cannot go in trial and error. So you have to be very perfect in those things. Okay. So there are many things. If I just keep on explaining, it's going to take a lot of time. But basically, the networks will be very big in the production scenarios, like hundreds of devices. In the lab environment, we just simply add 10, 20 devices max. Okay. And also in the production network, you have some performance tuning, where basically you will do some optimizations in bandwidth, latency. There are other things as well. And one more major challenge you will face in the real network is the vendor and the customer interaction. Now, vendor means, let's say you need to buy a Cisco device, a router, switch, or anything it can be. So what you have to do, you have to connect with a partner, maybe a partner who is providing you the purchase, or maybe you connect with Cisco. So which means you have to be in touch with the vendor to be able to communicate what is your requirement, and accordingly the vendor will suggest few options, and then you should understand them and you need to get back. So there will be a continuous because in the real scenarios, the network engineers often need to interact with vendors for support. Let's say if you have an issue, let's say one more thing, I set up my network with a Cisco device. There's a major network down. So you still have a Cisco TAC support. You need to connect with Cisco TAC and you can resolve the issue as well. Okay, there is an option. You need to support. You might need to get a support from Cisco as well in setting up the things, or sometimes troubleshooting, or sometimes if there's a major issue which you are unable to solve, there is a continuous interaction with the support for purchasing the devices, or if you are adding any new technologies, you need to continuously communicate. That's where the communication skills and the technical skills plays an important role. Okay, just communication skills will not help. Okay, many people think good communication skills will help. That's how many people think like that, but strong technical skills is also important. Okay, so here you can still manage with the technical skills, not at a higher level, but communication skills you can just manage. Like many of managers working in a company, they just have good communication skills, not technical skills. Okay, it depends on people's choice. Okay, that's a different case. Anyway, if you have questions on it, I'll take it. No need to worry. Customer interaction is also important because you also need to communicate with the customer. Like you are working for an IT solution company and you provide a support to a bank, and you maintain hundreds of branch offices of the bank, including firewalls and everything. Now, your job is to make sure that you continuously interact, because you will be providing the support for internal as well as external customers. Well, like internal means within my company or maybe outside, because you're actually a technical expertise who is doing that, because you should be in a position to explain the problem. Because if there is something not working and there is something, it will take 2-3 days time, a bank manager will not understand you because he's not technical guy, right? So obviously he wants everything up within few minutes, but still you should be in a position to explain what is a problem and why it is taking time. These all things are also important, right? Just having a technical expertise is not enough. You should be in a position to explain the complex issues, mostly for non-technical people. Okay, so this is what the problem. Okay? There are many problems, of course. Transition to problem. The lack of experience is one of the major thing. Okay, so the first thing is a real job challenge, lack of experience, and of course the second problem is expectations. The expectations by companies. Okay, the first thing is the problem from our side. Okay, from our side we don't have enough skill set, enough the enough skill set from our side, enough experience from our side, not having a clear idea about the things. The second thing is expectations from the company side. Okay, so let me just quickly pause, and if you see any questions up to here, because there are many things I'll be covering up. I don't want to wind up today itself. There are some expectations. I think this is something what I'll try to cover up at least.